The most important thing to me is that my athletes succeed and that they're reaching their maximum potential. It's not about me and it's not about my ego. It's not like I have to write it and I have to be the best. No, it's about them succeeding and them reaching their fullest potential. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to be able to make that happen.
Hey, it's Ben Wise, and this is The Fitness Movement. Fitness Movement is brought to you by Zor Fitness. Zor Fitness is my company and my platform to deliver training-related content to people just like you. The site features in-depth articles, movement breakdowns, and our online training program, The Protocol. And I offer one-on-one remote coaching for fitness athletes. So I hope you check it out. Head over to zorfitness.com. That's ZOAR fitness.com. See you there. Today we got Justin Cotler on the show. He is the founder and owner of CrossFit Dynamics in Queens, New York, which has been thriving for right about a decade now. He was the head coach of the grid team, the DC Brawlers, and he led them to 2 championships. And he also received the NPGL, which is the National Pro Grid League Coach of the Year. Justin is currently the United States Functional Fitness National Team head coach. In 2020, Justin and his family moved to Las Vegas, where he started Underdogs Athletics. And currently, Justin's coaching roster is sort of a who's who of elite CrossFit athletes, including third fittest woman on earth, Kari Pearce, along with Bethany Shadburn, Danielle Brandon, Tola Morakinyo, and Matt Dlugos. Together, those athletes won 4 out of the 10 of the 2020 quarterfinal events for North America. You can find him on Instagram at Justin Cotler, and at Underdogs Athletics, Facebook at Underdogs Athletics, and on the web at underdogsathletics.com. Today we talk about the benefits and potential difficulties of running a camp of elite athletes. We get into Justin's coaching philosophy, how he helps build trust with his athletes, and when he needs to, having tough conversations. We also talk about dealing with burnout with elite athletes and navigating the logistics of individualized sessions while still having the friendly competition that's needed for the elite athletes to push each other. And we finish out by talking about what he's got brewing in Vegas with the Underdogs crew. So without further ado, let's get into this conversation with Justin Cotler. Justin, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you. So first question I got to start off with is, who is Justin Matthews?
Oh, that's funny. So it's Justin Matthew, because it's my first name spelled with a Y, and then Matthew is my middle name. So that was my stage name when I was a full-time recording artist in my previous life, I like to tell people. So that was 97 to like 2007, pretty much full-time. And then there were some transition years when I started to transition into fitness full-time. But yeah, it's crazy, man. It seems like a different life now, but a good one though, so.
Yeah. I taught high school and I say the same thing. It's like, oh, this is a previous life. It just feels like it's at such a different time.
It's crazy.
Yeah. That's less of a transition than I feel like from, recording music and doing all that stuff to the fitness industry. It's just like a 180, it seems like. However, I would imagine there's some parallels. Like, are there things that you felt like are skills that you learned in the music industry that like carry over well to the fitness industry?
100%. And I think it's interesting because my wife was also now she was in the musical theater side, but she was a full-time performer. And I think for both of us, I like to say it's where before music, you're up on stage, et cetera. Now fitness is my stage. In a sense, being in front of people and having those people skills and being comfortable in front of a crowd. And, that all comes very natural to me. And I think it absolutely translates well, especially with a lot of the coaching that I've done for teams, in grid, especially when you had 20 people on a team, et cetera.
Right.
Being able to have a presence and being able to, to speak in front of people, I think is definitely a skill And it's one that when you're in the entertainment industry, it's something you have to be able to do well. And so I think without question, it translated well. And then obviously owning your own box and coaching classes, all that kind of stuff as well. Being engaging in front of people is important.
Yeah, 100%. Like I think that's probably an underrated skill in coaching, is just the ability to be able to, make your personality a little bit bigger, especially in like a group atmosphere or in front of a team, like you were talking about. It's huge.
Huge. Absolutely. We used to talk about it all the time. So we own CrossFit Dynamics, which, has been around a long time and obviously has had a very strong community in Astoria, Queens for a very long time. And I used to talk about it with my coaches. Generally speaking, the athletes that come to the classes, they don't care about how many certifications you have, how much science what you can spout off. They want you to make them feel special. They want to come to class. They want to be engaged. Obviously, they want to learn things, but they want to have a connection. And if you can't do that in front of a class, then you're never going to be a great coach. And that's, having the knowledge is one thing, but then being able to impart it and be able to coach a class where you can get people that are interested and that want to come back. That's the most important thing. And, I'll take somebody who's engaging over someone who can spout off a lot of science, but can't really talk in front of people. I'll take that other person every time, So yes, without question, it's super important. And I think obviously it can get better with practice, but it's one of those things. It's a phenomenal skill to have.
Yeah. Music it's largely about just like, especially if like when you have an audience, is like connecting with them is like the name of the game. Yeah. And it's the same thing with the coach athlete relationship. Like you just want to connect with them because then they're going to trust you and have more buy-in into the program. And like, they're probably going to actually adapt better to it too. Like from just like 100%. Looking at it from that perspective.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're a creative person?
I would say so. And I think everybody has different types, where I'm the worst like artist in the world. I can't draw or paint or anything like that. But yeah, I think so. I was an English major at the University of Pennsylvania and one of my favorite things to do is write and used to write a lot of poetry in college. And then obviously that translated very well to writing lyrics for songs and songwriting. Totally. And now I think, I do some writing. I do some, I've done some op-eds for Barbend. I do some writing still, which I love to do. But then obviously being creative, the creative process for me now obviously is programming, right? So totally. And I think that is a bit of an art form for sure. And there are some people obviously that program extremely well, and there's no perfect program, but I think when you're able to see the progress and be able to get the most out of your athletes, a lot of that does come from the creative process, and it also you have to be willing to evolve, and I think that's part of it as well, because programming is an ever evolving process. So I think the creativity that I've had in the past as an artist, as a singer songwriter, has translated very well to now this medium. Yeah,
I would say I'm sort of similar way where like I have some creative outlets. Like I feel like I'm a creative person, but like people wouldn't necessarily think of me that way because like I don't sing or songwrite or draw or do those sorts of things. But I feel like I'm in general a creative person. And one of the challenges I feel for myself, and I'm guessing this is way for other coaches who are creative, is like, it's like creativity is an important part of like programming for CrossFit because it's got a variety of things and unique challenges and all that kind of stuff. But also at a certain point, you have to learn to like kind of corral it and kind of keep it within sort of like the lanes, like bumpers on like when you were like a little kid bowling. Like sure. Basically you're trying to keep it in the lane. Are there ways that you feel like you sort of like put bumpers on your creativity so it's aligning with what you need to do?
Yeah. I mean, listen, I think without question, the great thing about CrossFit though, is that the lanes are pretty wide, right?
True.
So you can be pretty creative, and honestly, the programming for the games especially is incredibly wide. There's so many things that are inbounds per se, right? So that allows you to really think outside the box. Now I'm sure I could go back through some of the programming over the years and be like, well, that was kind of interesting. That's probably never going to show up. But you never know with Dave, right? So like you'll see something each year where you're like, whoa, where did they get that from? And there's always a new movement or a new apparatus or, some new toy that they create, and, you see it and then you're like, oh, okay, now we have to learn. Now we have to perfect that, right? Now we have to get good at that. So it does allow you to think outside the box, but obviously, you do have to take the athlete's like health and best interest in mind too.
Of course.
So there are some limitations, but the beautiful thing about CrossFit is there's so many things to be good at and to get good at. And it allows you to, I like to say you can play jazz a little bit, right? Like you can ad lib and you can have some fun with it. It's just not Olympic weightlifting where there's, your two lifts. It's not powerlifting where there's three lifts. It's, it's everything. Right. And that's pretty awesome. I mean, I still think that's why we can safely say that the men and women who win the CrossFit Games for that year are the fittest men and women on earth. It's because they really do things that are superhuman across, all modalities. It's absolutely amazing. And I see that stuff in the gym, with the athletes that we have here. And it's, sometimes you just shake your head, and it was that way in grid too. Then now that was more with specialists, but just being able to see people do things, and maximize, human performance it's just wild. It's awesome.
For sure. So I would imagine one of the challenges for any coach who is, heading a number of elite athletes in whatever sport it is like usually the coach never got to that sort of a level where like you're coaching an athlete who is better than you ever were or ever will be, right? Mm-hmm. And that's honestly the goal for a lot of coaches. Yeah. Like what kind of level do you think a coach needs to be, like proficiency of like their own movements, their own sort of fitness journey to actually have enough of their own experience where they can relate well enough to their athletes to coach them well? That's
a great question. So I played college sports. I played college basketball and I played college golf. And I've always been an athlete, since I was a little kid, incredibly competitive, incredibly athletic. And then by the time I got into CrossFit, I was kind of old, and had a few serious left knee injuries playing basketball, had 3 surgeries, et cetera. So by the time I was, full-time CrossFit, which was, or started to do CrossFit in 2007. So it's been 14 years. But I was already in my 30s at that time. Right. And I competed, but by the time I competed at regionals, and my last year competing at regionals was 2012. And at that time, if you were a guy and you were snatching over 200 pounds, you were really strong. And, if you were a woman, you were snatching over 130 pounds, you were really strong. And now, the men, if you're really strong, you snatch over 300 and the women snatch over 200. So it's a completely different sport now. But I like to say kind of being in between the lines on the competition floor, having that experience, training for that experience. I think that was invaluable, for me and my coaching experience. Mm-hmm. But even more so than that, just my history as an athlete and my history of competing at a high level and understanding the pressures of that. And especially golf, to be honest with you, because it's an individual sport. And now I coach a lot of individuals, and understanding like the mental pressure and, what it takes for mindset training. Cause I did a lot of that as a kid and did go to a sports psychologist a few times to work on pre-shot routine and work on, in-round thinking and all that kind of stuff. And that stuff is unbelievably important. Now, as a CrossFit coach, I am a generalist, right? So I program, and I'm essentially like, what I like to think of myself as is kind of like the project manager, right?
Yeah, totally.
And then I work with specialists. Now I have an endurance specialist who works with me and does, we come up with a lot of the Metcon pieces, or he'll write the Metcon pieces, and the monostructural pieces. And then I'll, take the ones I really like, we'll plug them in, I'll create the day. In the past, I've worked with a weightlifting specialist. We've worked with a gymnastics specialist. And what I do essentially is put everything together, right? And make sure that everybody's getting the best of what they need. Now, I'm proficient enough to be able to write a lot of those things, but it's always, you're naive to think that you're the best at everything. So if you're not collaborating with people who are specialists, who are better than you at certain things, then you're not going to put the best product out there. And ultimately, that's the most important. The most important thing to me is that my athletes succeed and that they're reaching their maximum potential. It's not about me and it's not about my ego, right? It's not like I have to write it and I have to be the best. No, it's about them succeeding and them reaching their fullest potential. And I'm going to do whatever it takes and collaborate with whomever I need to be able to make that happen.
Do you think the sort of the future of where this is going is like, I always compare it to something like, I think it's very similar to MMA, where it's like there's, a wrestling coach and a grappling coach, maybe a jiu-jitsu coach and the strength conditioning coach, and they're all going to sort of collaborate. And there might be one person who's acting as sort of a head coach, sort of like general manager, almost in a sense of like they're coordinating all the logistics of when they're going to which session, how they're feeling overall for the athlete. Do you see like that as more the role of like for you personally and other, elite CrossFit coaches in the future?
100%. Absolutely. And I think in a way it's already started to go that route. Where you see a lot of the camps, right? That will have specialists, right? That will have coaching specialists, and there'll be one kind of head chef, right? And then you've got your sous chefs. Yeah. Without question. I like I said, I think that's the smartest way to do it, because ultimately you have people who have devoted their entire lives to one specialty, right? To one specific thing.
Exactly.
And, ultimately speaking, like, my goal, like I said, is to be proficient at programming, several different specialties, right? But if there's somebody that I look at and I'm like, oh my gosh, that person's just incredible at what they do, I want to work with that person. I want to bring that person on board, and I want, they're going to be able to teach these athletes things that I can't, or that I can't, yet. And you're always learning as a coach, right? I mean, it's just one of those things. But if you're not willing to do that, I think in this sport, you're going to be left behind, I think you see that with a lot of the top athletes, right? The top athletes, generally speaking, they have a head coach, but they've also, they've worked with an endurance specialist. They've worked with a weightlifting specialist. They've worked with a gymnastics specialist. And ultimately speaking, I think that's intelligent. And I think that's the way it's going to keep going for sure.
Yeah, agreed. I also think that there's probably some benefit to knowing enough of all the different skills to be proficient so that when it's a more of a melting pot time of the season, like getting closer to competition, when you want to mix everything together and do, metcons with weightlifting and gymnastics, that's where like the specialists are like, well, I don't know what to do with that. That wasn't my sport growing up. That's where you come in and can step in and start to, again, sort of blend more of those modalities together then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and I think we've done a good job of that. And I've worked with some great, like I said, some great endurance specialists, weightlifting specialists. We're lucky here, with the athletes currently kind of in-house, right, at Underdogs Athletics here in Vegas. There's 4 that were like high level gymnasts,
True, yeah.
So that always helps as well, because there's certain things obviously that they just know, from a super young age, which is awesome. I mean, they're, but they can help the other athletes that weren't, so that's great. But it's cool, man. It's fun in this setting to have athletes that are so proficient at different things, because even though they're not a team, per se, a lot of days they work as a team and they help each other out, which makes my job a lot easier sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of our time today is going to be sort of spent on, like you said, like this camp that you've created in Vegas of these elite athletes. Yeah. And like, just like you said, I think it would be really easy for certain, like there's a lot more of these camps now popping up, and it's like, I think it would be really easy for some of them to, maybe as a more of an extreme word would be toxic, right? Where it's like, you are always trying to beat the person next to you. And like when it's on the line, like you're trying to sort of, maybe not undermine what they're doing, but at the end of the day, like you want to beat them.
Yeah.
How do you like create sort of that team atmosphere rather than it being sort of dog eat dog? Like at the end of the day, like, of course, at the end of the day, you trying to get your best effort out of yourself, but ultimately, like, how do you have it be more of a team building type relationship instead of a like dog eat dog head to head type atmosphere?
I think without question that's coming from the top down. And a lot of that is understanding very quickly, what personalities you have there. You have to be able, you can't treat everybody the same. At least I don't, and before people came here or before we decided to do this, I spent a lot of time just having conversations, with the athletes, with those athletes, because you have to prepare them for what's about to come, in the sense of like, listen, this is what we're doing, right? Like, you're going to be in an environment where every single day you're going to be training next to somebody that ultimately at the end of the season, you're going to try to beat them, right? Like that's your goal. Yeah. And we've got to understand that while those competitive juices, like I don't want to pacify them, obviously, like I want to enhance them. Like you have to understand that we're all here for a common goal. And if you don't think that your ego can handle training with that person every single day, then it's not the right situation for you, right? Like that has to be explained, and it has to be laid out very clearly prior to doing this, because there are definitely going to be some athletes that are like, yeah, it's not for me. And that is totally fine, right? Like we've seen in the history of CrossFit that there are absolutely some athletes that can train by themselves and still be unbelievably successful.
Right.
But we've also seen situations where the same athletes who trained by themselves then all of a sudden got together with other athletes and they now were otherworldly, right? Like it was a whole different level.
Totally.
And the athletes that we have here have done an unbelievable job of staying competitive, but also staying respectful, and in a sense, really becoming a family. I don't think there's any way to do this without feeling a sense of camaraderie and a sense of love for the person that's next to you. And I think a lot of that just has to do with respect for the fact that they're putting in the work and suffering right next to you every single day, but like you said, I don't think there's any question that's not for everybody, and that you have to come in and be open-minded to understanding that, like, hey, I'm trying to be the best that I can be. I respect that person is trying to be the best that they can be. They're not my enemy day in and day out, but man, I'm going to try to beat their ass when the time comes. And that's really the way you've got to look at it, because, if you don't have that competitive fire, when the time comes, like, you could get soft, and that's the last thing we're trying to do. If anything, we're trying to create the opposite. So there's a fine line there, and there has to be, an understanding, and a respect with still keeping, that competitive fire.
Yeah. Keeping that edge and like building on it, like you said, it's obviously super important, and it's something that you don't get if you're training alone, which is, yeah, obviously one of the big benefits of having a camp like you do. When an athlete comes to you and they're like, say, like one of the elites is coming to you and asking, like, or at least talking about you potentially being their coach, you were kind of, mentioning how you're in conversation with them before it's just like, yes, I'll take you on, which I imagine like a big part of you just like immediately wants to start coaching them because like they're an elite athlete. Like who
Right.
wouldn't, like, there's so many people who just would like to have one games athlete, for example. Like, number one, like, how do you kind of create a little bit of separation there to make sure that they're actually a good fit for the team that's already in place? And then like, what do some of those conversations look like?
Yeah. I think everybody's a little bit different. It was interesting with everything that happened this year. So when we moved here, we had I was already coaching Kari, for a while, and Kari essentially is part of our family, right? Like, it's not, it's obviously coach athlete relationship, but if you've heard me kind of talk about my relationships with my athletes in the past, I don't know any other way than, it's not a business relationship to me. It never
Right.
has been. I'm an extremely emotional person. I get emotionally invested, and ultimately it becomes a family-like situation. So when we moved here to Vegas, and Kari was, we spoke to her, and she decided she was going to move out here with us, with my family and I, and obviously she's not living with us, but she moved, packed up from New York and came to Vegas, and then the situation that we kind of did stage one of the games all together with Bethany and Danielle, who I wasn't coaching at the time, and they, I think, were impressed with the process and with my relationship with Kari, and then they sat down with me to talk about coming out here and with me working with them. And they're very different people, like Danielle and Bethany. It's interesting, personality wise, extremely different. Bethany's extremely introverted. She's a lot like Kari, where that the routine and the habits are, it's like the Bible, like they have their, and Danielle's much more free spirited, much more outgoing. Reminds me a lot of like, I've coached Colin Porter in the past, who I love, and he's like our Aussie son. We call him our Aussie son. Danielle reminds me a lot of Colin. She's unbelievably talented, but she also likes to have fun and go out and do things. So there's a little, you treat people a little bit, there's a little bit of a different relationship. Then our conversations were different coming in, right? Like, what they were looking for, and basically what I try to establish as quickly as possible is trust, is letting them know that, like, my goal as a coach, right, is to help them reach a level that they've never reached before, right? Is to and for these women, listen, they're both finished top 10 in the world, right? One's finished 8th in the world, one's finished 10th in the world. So that next level, though, to get to top 5 in the world, there is a difference there, I mean, and you try to explain to them, like, we've had success in the past. We've done it with Kari. And now it's a matter of them kind of buying into, what, it's what you're saying and what you're doing and the process and everything else. But those conversations to me are very important, and it's not something that happens in one conversation, right? It's like, it's a series of conversations where you really get to know somebody and they get to know you, and you are an open book. Like, when I speak to an athlete, I'm like, listen, ask me what you want to ask me, right? Like, because you don't want them to get here and then they're like, oh man, this isn't at all what I expected. It's not working out for me. It's not this, not that. So it's incredibly important for them to gather as much information as possible, and for me to gather that information, and then also to really let them know that once they commit to me, that I'm all in, that I will do anything and everything in my power to get them to that next level, and that they can trust me implicitly to do that, and that I've got their back. And so that's unbelievably important to me. I think that if you don't establish that trust, that there's just, that the relationship will suffer. And it takes people, not all athletes take the same amount of time either, right? Like, you can tell when an athlete is all in, and you can tell when an athlete has 1 foot in and 1 foot still out, right?
Right.
But at the end of the day, I know I'm all in, and once they go all in, the results have been very good. So, that's a key.
I think saying someone's like all in, I think everybody understands what that means. I think maybe in a day-to-day, that's a little bit more complicated to try to figure out what exactly that looks like. Like, if you are an elite athlete, like, what does all in actually mean for you minute by minute, kind of going throughout your day, which is ultimately like what people talk about with, like, trusting the process and like all those, that kind of language. If you have an athlete and they do go out, for example, or they miss a workout, or, all these little decisions that they might make that maybe it wasn't even like a conscious thing, but it doesn't necessarily align with their goals of being top 5 in the world or something, or landing the podium or win the games. How do you go about having like a tough conversation with an athlete in a situation like that?
I think any coach will tell you, you have to be able to, there are times when tough love comes into play, right? Like, you have to, there are situations that have happened in the past, with athletes, where you see certain things, you see patterns, that aren't aligning with the goals.
Right.
You see where the routines or the habits aren't aligning, and at that point in time, I think if you aren't doing your athlete any justice if you don't address them, right? Like, if you just keep letting it go, then you're as much responsible as the athlete is, I think. Now, once you say it, right, and once you address it, and once you bring it to their attention, obviously then it's on them, to make those changes. But as a coach, you have to be there to help them. So if they, if the nutrition doesn't look great, or they're not doing, then either you do it, or you bring in a nutrition specialist. You bring in someone to hold them accountable, right? If there are some issues with sleep, or not getting enough rest, or whatever else, those are things that are correctable, and those are things that need to be addressed. Ultimately, the athlete has to want it, right? But in the past, when I've addressed those things, or I've seen those things, usually the changes are made, and usually they're and then the progress is immense, and then once the athlete sees that changing those things has now helped them get to the next level, then it doesn't take a lot of convincing after that.
Yeah, they're
right?
way more likely to listen to you too.
100%. Yeah. And, I think, for instance, right? Like, I'm not going to name names, but we had an athlete here who's unbelievably talented. And, and that athlete, in my opinion, just wasn't dialed in nutrition wise. Right. And there was a workout that we did. I don't remember the specific workout, except that it involves an assault bike. And, and they were just smashed and literally got lapped by the other athletes. And after the workout was over, they came to me and I was like, listen, I was like, this is what we have to do. And this is what you have to do. And if we don't do it, then this is just going to continue to be a pattern, because you're not eating enough calories. You're not eating high enough quality food. You're not doing this. And they made the change, and it's been unbelievable, and it's been a short time where, the improvements and the progress seen on a daily basis was enormous. And all it took was, you say it's a small change. I mean, nutrition obviously is huge. But really it wasn't this, mammoth change. It was these, and that's really what it is. It's these small little changes to routines or habits that have these enormous differences. But that's a great example of something that actually happened. It's a tangible example. And the results have been amazing. And again, like you said, I think it brings you closer as athlete and coach, because, you as a coach recognized, and then were willing to do what was necessary to help. And then, when the athlete sees the benefit, it's massive.
Yeah, you're like almost creating sort of a fork in the road, where it's like, either you're going to go closer to your goals and you're going to be more involved in the program, you're going to trust in me more as your coach, or you're going to, choose not to do that. And then that's pretty clear as to like what decision that you're making. And like, I think that's probably what a lot of coaches are afraid of, is that they'll take the other route and go away from you. And you have to realize, if you want to coach like the best in the world, like that's going to happen sometimes. And in order to get there, like you have to be willing to place that fork in the road for the athlete almost.
You do. And not only that, is it sometimes you just can't worry about somebody's feelings. And I mean, it's as harsh as it is to say that, like, sometimes you have to say what needs to be said. And you have to be able to make a tough decision sometimes. And it might rub that person the wrong way in the moment, but when they actually have a time to step away and think about it, generally speaking, they understand that you're doing it for their best interests.
Right.
And, those conversations sometimes need to be had. And that's part of being a coach, and it's part of coaching elite athletes. It's not always going to be puppy dogs and ice cream, right? Like you got to sometimes, it sometimes gets a little messy. But at the end of the day, I think that's where that whole background of trust, like that whole basis, right, of trust comes in. 'Cause you're not being an asshole to be an asshole, right? You might have to be a little bit of an asshole to be able to get them to understand, like, listen, this has got to change, or we got to do this. Otherwise we're not going to get here. And this is where you want to be, So that's definitely part of it.
Yeah. Like we both mutually have the same goal of getting you to be the best athlete that you can be. Like that's what we're trying to do here. And that's where that conversation comes from. So it's a different conversation than if you didn't have that background of trust already built in, for sure.
Yeah.
Another topic, if we stick on the camp, the training camp, is I obviously, like, there's just way more, like if you're head to head in a group or a training environment, I don't think anyone's really going to dispute that there's a lot of benefit to, having that intensity and that push with someone next to you. However, as we know with CrossFit, like intensity can sort of be a double-edged sword at times.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you ever have athletes who, like maybe someone who came on site, and obviously that's an initial change, and there's a lot of other factors that go into that too, but maybe they they had some burnout because the intensity was so high, or just maybe just underperformed or under recovered because the intensity is higher? And if that is the case, like, how do you go about kind of dealing with that?
Yeah. I think so. I think there are two good ways to answer that. I think one is that there are some days when I'll have, and we'll have an athlete that you can tell just isn't feeling great, or, they just know that they don't have the intensity level.
Right. They don't have it that day.
Yeah. And you've got to be willing and understanding as a coach to know that, listen, if they compete day in and day out like it's the final workout at the CrossFit Games, they're not going to survive a season. You know what I mean? Like, they're just that there has to be different levels of intensity, and you have to be able to have a certain intensity level that you go into train with every day, but you also have to have another level that you can raise it to. And you can't do that every day. And you have to understand that as a coach. You have to understand that some days people are just going to be that way. Right. Like, and that's okay. Right. And there's things to learn even from those days, right? Like, you can learn something
right.
from every workout that you do, whether you're feeling great, whether you're not, et cetera. So I think as a coach, you have to be flexible in understanding that that's the case. And, I think, the other thing that we do is we have very open conversations with our athletes about deloads, right? About, because not everybody's on the same deload, and not everybody, because they're not the same person. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
There's very few athletes that I know that are like Kari, that can go literally. I mean, if Kari could go a whole season and not do a deload, it's like I laugh because I have to put it in. I have to force her to deload.
Yeah.
But then there are other athletes that need a deload every 4 weeks. Right. And so you've got to really understand your athlete, and you can't just say, okay, this is what we're doing for everybody. I mean, that's irresponsible. It's not the individualized athlete or individualized coached athlete. They're not on a template program, right? Like, you've got to take into account what works best for that person. Now, if someone's following a template program, that's a different story, right? That's a whole different animal. But for the athletes that we have here, or the athletes that I coach in general, coach remotely, et cetera, you have to have that understanding, and you have to know when to say when sometimes, So, we build those things in, and we also have, there's constant communication about how people are feeling, and where we need to adjust things, or where we might need to back off percentage wise, et cetera. And I think that just comes with, being a good coach and being educated. And I wouldn't say that, that makes me, I mean, there are a lot of coaches that do that, obviously, and understand that, you got to back off sometimes, and you've got to allow, people's bodies to recover, to be able to move forward and continuously move forward. Right. So those are two of the big things that we do.
I think, I mean, one of the big challenges could just be logistically with having that many athletes on site doing different programs, and then also trying to mesh them together. So for example, like, you come off of a season, say it's everybody mixes the games, let's just assume that. And then maybe they go through some of the deload, and then they maybe come back on site at some point, and then it's like, okay, we're in more of an off-season type, limiter based, working on weaknesses, that sort of thing, where it's maybe a little bit more individualized. How might that work logistically? Like, where, do you have, okay, everybody's doing their individual session in the AM, and then we come back in the PM and do like everybody's doing their thing together. How does that work practically on a day-to-day type schedule?
And that actually, that's a good example of kind of the way things have been. Earlier in the season, there was a lot more individualized programming going on. As we've ramped up the season, especially now we're getting ready for semis, they're doing stuff together a lot more. It just ramps up the intensity. You know, we Metcon, we make sure that we're Metconning together. It's now, let's see if I count it. They're making sure to Metcon at least 3 days where the entire crew is Metconning together.
Gotcha.
So 3 out of 5 training days, right, in the gym.
Yeah.
But they're doing a lot of conditioning pieces together. And generally speaking, at least a 2 or 3 will pair up for weightlifting pieces as well. So that's definitely increased more as we've gone on in the season, but there's definitely a time in the season where we're really hammering weaknesses, you know, and we got, you know, listen, Matt Dlugos, one of the guys we have here, he's 6'4", right? Like he's always going to need to hammer body weight movement. It's just the way it is. I mean, he's long, he's got long levers, etc. You know, Kari Pearce doesn't need to practice handstand push-ups very much, right? Like, you know, we touch on him, but you know, where he's really hammering away, it's strict handstand push-ups and chest to bars and bar muscle ups, strict muscle ups, all these different things. You know, she doesn't need to do those pieces with them. So there are times where it's just going to look a little bit different. But the one thing we try to keep as consistent as possible is doing Metcons together, because as you know, it's you know, it's just hard to recreate that type of environment and intensity when you're doing it by yourself. And I always tell them, like, you didn't come here to do this by yourself. You could have done that at your home gym, wherever you came from. So if you're not Metcon with the group, you know, you're not able to level up every single day. Again, even if the intensity level is not necessarily at 10, you know, what you're going to do by yourself is not going to be at the same intensity level. So, you know, so that's kind of the way it looks, you know?
Yeah, no, that definitely sheds a lot of light. Yeah. I think that when you have a group of people and they're all sort of doing their own thing, but then they come together to sort of do like their sports sessions, that's where you're really trying to push the intensity, and it's just so much benefit to that. In the Metcons where you all come together, do you like have and this is like super practical, but I think that's a lot of what coaching is, but it's like, are you going to say, okay, when we have these 3 days a week, we start the Metcon at 3:30 p.m. and they all do a different warm up to get there, and they all kind of do their own different routines? Or is it like we all go through a structured progression together and you have to be at the gym at this certain time? Or is it just kind of like whenever everybody rolls up in the afternoon, they get started?
So we have a designated time that they do the Metcons on Tuesdays, Fridays, Saturdays. So there's a time.
Gotcha.
Right. So if you show up late and your warm up is cut short, that's on you. Right. Like that's your fault. Now I write warm ups for everybody, but there is definitely some leeway there, because there are some athletes that really like to do some of their own warm ups. They've done that in the past. They feel comfortable there. And I like to say I'm a player's coach. So, you know, I definitely allow some leeway there. And what I say is that the warm-ups that I'll give them are definitely suggested, but they can add and subtract the stuff that they like and feel good with. But there's no leeway when it comes to the time. Like that's when we're going to Metcon. And, you know, I think it's important, because I think, you know, listen, competitions, there's a specific time. You have to be ready for it. You have to be, you got to be mentally and physically ready to go. And so I think that's just good practice.
Totally.
You know, but, you know, aside from that, as you were saying, like some people take a little longer to warm up. Some people take a little short, you know, don't take quite as long to warm up. They kind of understand that and know that. And I, like I said, I'll give some leeway on that, but we're very structured when it comes to, you know, when we're starting, et cetera. So I'd say it's kind of in the middle. right? Like I wouldn't say I'm a drill sergeant, but at the same time, I wouldn't say it's just this free for all, right? Like there definitely has to be some structure there.
Yeah, no, I think I think the past games athletes were a little bit more like free spirited and relaxed about how they went about their training sessions. Like, kind of get moving whenever you kind of feel like it, because if you're on your own, you have one other training partner, you show up and it's very relaxed, but yet at the same time, like that's not the way the games is run.
Right.
Like Dave isn't like, all right, well, we'll see. You can maybe show up in the afternoon sometime. We'll do event 4. Like that's not how it works. Like it is regimented, and you all have a start time. It's very like, it's structured.
Well, he comes from that.
At the same time, it is right. Exactly.
He comes from
That's
that
actually one of the things I was going to say.
Yeah. So I think without question, like you have to be ready for that. And so that, but it's interesting. Like I see a lot of people, a lot of athletes in the past and a lot of camps that do like simulated semifinals weekends or things like that. And I'm not a huge fan of that. I just think I'm very concerned about creating an environment where you're gonna see the athletes compete at an intensity that then again 2 or 3 weeks later they've got to turn around and go compete at that same intensity. I'm not a huge fan of creating a simulated, but I do think it's important on a weekly basis to have specific start times for Metcons just to get in the mind frame of that. So, that's I would say that's something that's probably a little bit different about stuff, that we do, is that I see a lot of people that do that. And I'm just not a huge fan of it. I just am a little concerned about having to, go to that place, because if you call it simulated semis, people are going to want to compete, at that hot. And I don't, to me, it's like, okay, there's not a simulated Olympics. You know what I mean? Like I want you to be, I want you to peak at that time. And I don't want to take the chance of us crashing after we do this simulated one. So yeah. So
and especially if you have an athlete who's a perennial athlete and they've been to, multiple events that are multiple workouts long, like they've had that backlog of experience already. They don't really need to do that a bunch more times. Like you're better off maybe being a slightly erring on the side of maybe being, undertrained or maybe just better recovered than, being super ready for competition, but feeling like you're burnt out because you just went super hard in 5 events in a weekend in a simulated comp. Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Do you ever program like the Metcons where everybody's together? Is that usually like, hey, this is what the sport is, like, quote, like that's what you'd be saying, and like we all do exactly the same thing? Or are you giving people tweaks of the ways that they are individualizing this workout for them on a given day? So for example, the workout is just regular double unders. You might give somebody heavy, but at, a less rep range or something. Do you change it or tweak it at all or no?
Generally speaking, when we do the Metcons together, it's uniform.
Okay.
Now, listen, if we need to modify or scale something because of somebody's health, that's a different story.
Yeah, totally.
But generally speaking, they want to compete.
Yeah.
And
if you compare a little bit.
If you change the workout slightly, it's not the same workout. Yeah. Usually they don't like that very much. They want to be able to compete. And also it's good. It's good to be able to see. One thing that generally speaking we'll do in Metcons too, and unless they come up to me and ask me, I like to let them figure it out, because then we can take what they did, assess it, and then make changes to the strategy afterwards. But yeah, generally it's fun for me to kind of see how they would attack a workout without my help. And then we can look at it and say, okay, this is what you did great, and this is where we can make some changes, and this is how we can improve, but yeah, generally speaking, the Metcons are uniform. It's just, they like to compete, and it's if one thing is different or this thing is different, then it's not quote unquote the same. So the comparison doesn't mean as much. It doesn't, hold as much water.
Right. Totally. All right. Final question for you.
Yeah.
What is your vision with Underdog Athletics as a whole, and your presence in Las Vegas?
Well, I think Underdogs, we started it very, very small and as far as an online program, but to me, Underdogs athletics is more of a movement. And I say that in the sense of, we've got a physical, tangible, training space. We've got an online program. We've got, kind of like a theme behind it. Right. And my goal for it is really to help athletes reach their maximum potential. I mean, it sounds simple, but that's what it all started out of. Like I got into this business to help people. Our motto back in New York at Dynamics is change your fitness, change your life, and that can be on a micro or a macro level. It can be for the everyday person. It can be for the elite athlete. So, I think what we're going to do is as we expand, because right now we just have a competitor program online, but our goal is to have a general fitness program. Our goal is to have, pre and postnatal. My wife is pre and postnatal certified. She's phenomenal. She coaches a lot of pre and postnatal women. And so that's something we're going to add. We're going to do affiliate programming, all that kind of stuff. So we've got a big vision as to where we want to go, but I think it's incredibly important to grow it organically, to do it the right way. And that's what we're doing, and it's been amazing to be here and have these athletes, as part of our family and our community. It's been incredible. The first launch of Underdogs was really successful. And then if you notice, the way we did it was we opened up registration and then we shut it down. We're not taking people on in the middle of the cycle because I just don't think that's fair. It's not fair to the program. It's not fair to the person, to jump in the middle. And so we're doing things a little bit differently, but again, it's small, it's manageable. And I love the way that it's growing, and we're just, I just think we're here to help people, and that's the biggest thing.
You guys are doing it the right way, and it shows.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Hey, Justin, thanks for doing this today.
My pleasure, Ben.
Hey, it's Ben again, and I wanted to take a minute to talk about our online training program, The Protocol. The Protocol is for athletes who want to train for the sport of fitness. It's programmed by me, and it's my best attempt at preparing athletes with varying strengths and weaknesses for the demands of the sport. And I do this through the use of silos, which basically means I segment parts of the program based upon athletes' ability in a particular area. So for example, an element of the program this fall on Tuesdays and Thursdays was gymnastics-focused training. And there are 4 different silos, so athletes could choose to work on chest bars or muscle-ups or handstand push-ups or handstand walks. In other words, we are all doing the same core program, but there are ways to individualize it on a weekly basis. And as part of the program, I also include coaches' notes, technique videos, and educational resources almost daily. My goal is to not just have this feel like you're doing a workout plan, but to feel like I'm actually coaching you through the process of becoming the best athlete you can be. And having access to the protocol is just part of the benefit of being a pro member. You also get instant access to the Vault, which is exactly like it sounds. It means that you unlock the ability to be able to download all the programs that I've ever written. So this includes things like Bulletproof Body, which is the accessory work for functional fitness, gymnastics density for the Big 5, functional thickness, your first muscle up, cyclical supremacy, overhead squat mobility, breathwork for the sport of fitness, and it could go on and on. And lastly, you get instant access to pro articles, which are on topics that I really want to safeguard from the public and keep for my athletes. Stuff like cycle speeds for CrossFit open movements, strength ratio data analysis, so basically determining your relative weaknesses on strength work, breaking down sanctionals programming or games programming, energy systems testing and analysis, and a whole lot more. And if this sounds like stuff that you're into, you can get a 7-day free trial of Pro. Simply head over to zorfitness.com/pro. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay the course.